Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Good stuff to talk about again today. We'll discuss the latest school testing scores released this week that show in some areas Wisconsin has some of the poorest performing schools in the entire country. We'll talk about the increasing number of news reports that are trying to show a more direct link between the Pope and some of the priest sexual abuse cases than the Vatican had previously admitted. And now that Obama's health care plan is law, what in the world can we expect to happen? All right, joining us now, our newspaper columnist, Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, aide to Republican State Senator Mary Lozick, and oftentimes a host over at WISN Radio. And Denise Callaway, the communications director for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, let's get right into it. Some national school testing scores were released that show Wisconsin's African-American fourth graders have the lowest reading scores of any state in the entire country. And it shows that Arkansas is the only place in America where African-American eighth graders have lower reading skills. Certainly makes you think that maybe the current system isn't working very well and that big changes are long overdue. So Denise, what's the answer? If Milwaukee's the root of the problem, so when they propose a mayoral takeover, everybody says, no, that's not the answer. So what's the answer?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the answer is. And I guess it's also important to say I don't think there's any one thing that we have to do that's going to cause things to get better for kids in the city when it comes to education. But I think clearly there are some things that we need to be able to do and be able to take a look at pretty quickly. One is, let's take a look at just what's happening with the different reading curriculum that are out there. Because there are a number of different reading curriculum in MPS. Is there one curriculum that seems to be working better? And if that is, that's what we ought to do. But I do think there are some deeper issues. So this is a sign of a couple of things. That first of all, within the system itself, I do think we need to take a look at whether or not we have a system that really is accountable to the kids who are in the schools. And I don't think that we do. So I think we do have to take a look at things like perhaps some kind of governance shift. I don't think that's something that you rule out, but there are multiple things that we have to take a look at within the system. And though I don't want to make this seem like an excuse, but one of the things that we do know is that children who are low-income children tend not to perform as well as children from middle-income families. We need to take a look at what's happening in communities in terms of poverty and other issues that do impact kids. Kids do bring it to school, but it's not an easy, there's no one thing that we need to do. There's no easy solution, but the one thing that has to happen is we all have to take this seriously. These kids, these scores didn't just drop all of a sudden. It's not like we had 98% of the kids who were proficient and then it suddenly fell to 8%. Or 9% rather. This has been going on for years, and we've reached the point where we're at the bottom. And I do wonder about when as a community are we going to say enough? We need to work together, put aside what's in the best interest of adults, and do what needs to be done for kids in this community.
I heard somebody say the other day, well, we all have to work together. The union has to work with the state, has to work with MPS and the city. They've been working together, haven't they, for decades?
I mean, it sounds nice, and yeah, we do have
These
to.
are the people
we do
that
all have to work together, right? But what does that mean? I mean, can you break that down in specifics? We all have to work together. That sounds nice on a bumper sticker, but what does it really mean? It is terrible news. It's horrible news. It's an atrocity. But, and I don't mean to diminish what we read in the paper this week, but this is a national literacy epidemic. It's across the entire country where scores for fourth graders in reading didn't move at all since the last time they administered these tests. This is a national problem. So what we're doing right now is not working. Maybe certain elements of President Bush's plan, we have to go back, look it over again, maybe scrap it. They put billions of dollars into early reading programs. Hasn't worked. Maybe you get on the phone and you call the few areas in the country that saw a little blip of success, and that's Rhode Island, Kentucky, and the District of Columbia, and see what they're doing. I found it very interesting. The woman that oversees these tests said, you know what, our kids just aren't reading enough. And what they are reading isn't the good stuff, is what she said. And I don't know what that means, but maybe we do have to get kids into reading more and more of what they should be reading and get them off of the computer, because obviously what they're reading on the computer isn't cutting it. But there are things to do, and I think they're talking about tightening up the graduation standards. Something has to be done because these kids are not ready for high school, and if they're not ready for high school, they won't be ready for college, and if they're not ready for college, they won't be ready for the workplace.
Wouldn't it make sense to look at the list and say, okay, who's 1, 2, and 3, and do exactly what they're doing? Exactly what they're doing.
Well, there's truth in what both Kevin and Denise have said, but the truth of the matter is, the overall truth of the matter is, when the story came out, it sounded very familiar to me, and I remember I'd written a column several years ago about the same study, and I went back and found it was in 2007 when, again, we were the worst in the country. We were the worst in the country, maybe over the past couple of years since, we were only almost the worst. But, this has been years and years and years, and when you're the worst, what Denise says is absolutely true about poverty and the achievement gap and the difference between black and white, but there's not an urban school in the country that doesn't have all the problems of poverty and achievement gap and all that. When we're the worst, we just simply haven't addressed the problem, period. We have not addressed it as a crisis. I wrote in 2007, it is a crisis.
Yeah, it is.
And why haven't we treated it as a crisis? Why haven't we heard from the governor, I said then, the mayor, as I said then? Now, they came out with this, well, let's have the mayor take it over plan this past year, but they did not come out with any education plan connected with that. It was just, let's change who's in charge of it, instead of any education plan. My real basic belief in why we haven't addressed this, and we should be addressing it, we should putting every resource we can into it, is that the people with the power are fairly happy with their kids' schools. The people with the power, it is the black achievement scores which are at the very bottom. It's not the achievement scores of the white folks. And as a matter of fact, the achievement gap between black and white is the biggest in the country. And for that reason, white folks are saying, well, what's the problem? Our kids are doing okay.
Well, but the white folks in Milwaukee just abandoned the school system.
Yes, they did. And now there's another thing that skews this somewhat. And Kevin might object, but I think it's basically true. One of the objections to the voucher program, you look at what's different in Wisconsin from Mississippi and Alabama and those states that we used to look down on as illiterate, and Randy Newman wrote a song about how you go in school dumb and you come out dumber and stuff like that. But the truth of the matter is, we are worse now, with all of our high opinion of ourselves here in Wisconsin. We are worse than Alabama. We are worse than Mississippi. We are worse than Texas and Florida, and you name some southern state that we used to look down our nose at. But one thing that's different here, we're taking the most motivated, the highest achieving perhaps, the ones with the parents who are most motivated of African-American students, and moving them, a number of them, a large number of them, into voucher schools.
Where they're doing pretty good.
Well, not necessarily, but they are certainly taken out of the public school system. That brings the public school scores down, because what's left there are very, very difficult, very difficult to educate children, and special education.
I do think that it is a problem with the system itself. There is absolutely, positively no incentive for adults in this system to do a better job of educating kids. And yes, kids surely bear some of the responsibility, but adults also bear some responsibility
By
as
adults,
well.
You mean parents, teachers,
adults,
both?
Parents, teachers, principals,
I'm glad you said it.
superintendents.
I'm glad you said it, because had I said it, I'd be teacher bashing.
Parents not being involved.
But let me tell you what the problem with MPS is. The only people who have consequences for the failure of this system are the kids. There are no consequences for adults. So when you said, how can we work together? I think one of the things that we need to do is to take a look at what legislative roadblocks there are to holding adults accountable. What are we? One of the
fire
things,
a bad teacher?
Well, God forbid.
Happen.
One of the things that we've talked about here, when we talked about this whole idea of the mayor having governance over the school system, and when we talked about some of the things that were tried to have been done legislatively as it related to the money that we were trying to get in terms of improving schools from the feds, there is legislation that was attempted and that was passed that would tie teacher reviews back to student performance. But that was so watered down because it's now only if everybody agrees, including the teacher, is that something that we're able to do.
How about in the short time we have left here, I just
do.
throw out this, how about we just spend more time on reading in the classroom? And maybe not spend as much time on other things, which we don't have time to get into, but maybe the emphasis now needs to be on reading and on math and not so much on some of the other things we're wasting our time in our public schools.
Next topic. How about all these reports that are coming out that are trying to show that Pope Benedict may have known more about some of the priest sexual abuse cases from around the world than the Vatican has previously admitted? The reports from the New York Times and elsewhere are pretty much implying that before he was Pope, Benedict too was reluctant to crack down on child molesters. I don't think this is shocking anybody, really.
It's not shocking, and it documents what we've all suspected, that the institution of the church was always more interested in protecting the institution than in even morality or humanity or anything else. And we knew that this particular pope, was in that role of being like the enforcer for the Vatican, that a lot of these complaints went to. And for the longest time, the Vatican kept pretending this was a problem with American bishops or American Catholics somehow, that the priests here, were these predators and there was something going on here in America. Well, it's going on in Ireland, it's going on in Germany, where the Cardinal himself was directly involved in some of it, or the Pope when he was the Cardinal there. And the church just simply has, for far too long, has been more worried about the image of the church. What they say in politics, that the crime is, will get you in trouble, but the cover up will get you in even more trouble. And it is so clear that the church was just trying to get this stuff out of sight, make sure it didn't become public, and they were more concerned about that than the children who were the victims, and that they should just come clean with all of that, because things are going to come out. You can't keep them buried. You can't even keep them buried if you're the Pope, if they would come clean and actually try to clean it up, and I've always said part of cleaning it up is to open the priesthood to married priests, because if you expect people to only become priests who don't have a normal sex life, you're going to run into some problems. But they have to deal with it, and they just refuse to. They would rather, they're looking worse by trying to hide it.
You wonder if they're being forced to deal with it finally.
Well, but I don't even know if they're really dealing with it. If you're seeing that they're still saying this is not about what happened. It's an attempt to smear the Pope.
Yeah, it is.
But it is also about what happened. It's about what happened and the fact that there haven't been good remedies within the church to address these issues, and not just in terms of what needs to be done for priest or anybody within the church hierarchy who has had a hand in this abuse issue, in this scandal. To me, the other thing that needs to happen is, how do you begin to heal the church itself? And that goes beyond those people who were victims. It also includes those people whose faith has been questioned, who've lost their faith because of what they've seen that's happened. So they have to deal with it, but it has to be on a multi-pronged approach. It can't just be, this is how we're going to punish those people who we can punish. This is what we're going to do to try to make sure these circumstances don't happen again. But beyond that, how do they begin to heal the faithful and to bring people back into the church who found this to be such a critical part of their lives, but who've left the church because of these things that have happened?
I think this has hurt the Catholic Church tremendously the last few years.
Well, it has, and it calmed down a bit the last couple of years, and now the New York Times is trying to percolate it again. I don't necessarily...
Well, those are shocking stories.
I don't necessarily disagree with you, Joel. I don't necessarily disagree with you, Denise. We've talked about this on this program. I've said many times, I consider myself a devout Catholic. This upsets me to no end. It's awful. It's terrible. But let me come at this from a different perspective. I think this is Catholic bashing on the part of the mainstream media, specifically the New York Times, which is out on a campaign to smear this Pope with unsubstantiated unsubstantiated reports at this time. They don't have the proof, but yet they come out with these blaring headlines that somehow this Pope was involved. And of course, he's going to get documents saying, alerting him that this was going on. He was in charge of all of this at the time. Of course, he's going to get that. What would you expect? He's going to get those reports. That doesn't make him complicit. And they're bringing up things like that are a half a century ago. Come on. This week, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops released its annual report on priest pedophiles. And the percentage of molestings is down 36%. Last year, there were only 6 cases of a priest molesting a child. That's 6 too many, of course. But the mainstream news media totally ignored that story. This situation, as bad as it is today, is not as bad as it was a few years ago. The church has taken steps. They are trying to solve this problem. And the overwhelming majority of people involved in the Catholic Church, and I'm talking about priests now, bishops, are good, honest, decent, law-abiding, humane individuals. And I think what the New York Times is doing with four journalists sitting here in this studio, I think you must admit that this is not a Pulitzer Prize-winning moment. When they smear an individual like the Pope without any validation,
it is
that's
absolutely
rotten journalism.
It's not true that there's no validation. If you have this situation here in Milwaukee, in St. Francis, where a priest has molested 200 children, and both Archbishop Weekland and his predecessor, Archbishop Cousins, were involved in this man's career. It was under Weekland that finally this man was being brought to trial. He sends a letter to Cardinal Ratzinger, and suddenly his trial is stopped. And that's nothing. That's certainly not unsubstantiated. That it was very well substantiated. And instead of facing up,
you're
to
connecting the dots, and because he got that letter.
And his deputy stopped the trial.
Right.
Yeah.
But,
all right.
Exactly.
Okay.
Beyond that, I think we need to be really clear about the fact that most of the bishops, most of the cardinals, vast majority of the priests are people who are good people and who are there because they feel called by God. But I don't think, though, that we can in any way, shape, or form at all say that this is a really serious issue that the church has to give absolute attention to. And I don't think it's done that in the past. I think its attention in the past has been, how do we move someone? How do we shuffle someone?
That's what they did in the past.
That has been the effort. But I don't see what the new effort...
Well, they're not over, though, because the kinds of statements they're putting out today show they're not over.
May I just say that if you don't think this is going on in other denominations, hello, but the Catholic faith has been a whipping boy for the mainstream press for decades and will continue to be, and that's what's going on.
I don't think whipping boy is the term you want to use.
And the other thing I think that we have to realize, too, is that perhaps the church now needs to take a look at how it's going to, as you suggested, Joel, come clean on this. Let's talk about what these issues are. Let's talk about what's happened, so you're not waiting for the next shoe to drop.
But let's be honest about it and put it in the right perspective.
That's fine. But part of being honest about it, is admitting what the depth of the problem is and taking steps to address it. That's not about smearing someone. That's not about a lynch mob mentality. That's about saying, this is a problem that we have. We care enough about the faithful and all of the people in the community that these are the steps that we're going to take to make sure this stops. Not that there are fewer cases, but that there aren't any.
All right, next topic. President Obama may have signed his health care bill into law this week, but that hardly means that the health care fight is over. In fact, to listen to the GOP tell it, the fight is just gearing up and not just about health care. They vowed to throw roadblocks in front of plenty of other Obama initiatives, too. All of that squabbling has Rick Horowitz thinking back, actually. Rick.
Hey there, ready for a quick trip down memory lane? Here we go, back to the year 2000 and the presidential campaign. Do you remember those bumper stickers the Democrats had that said Gore Lieberman? I think they were blue with white lettering across them. Yeah, those are the ones. Now, do you remember how right after the election that year, when the outcome was still in doubt, some people took that Gore-Lieberman bumper sticker and changed it so it said "Sore Loser Man." It was a big hit in certain circles, the kinds of circles that wanted the folks on the losing side to give it up and get a life. Get over it, they kept saying. You lost, get over it. And this was after an election that had been right on the edge for weeks, where there are only 5 electoral votes separating the 2 main candidates, where the losing side got 500,000 more popular votes nationwide than the winning side did, where the result in the final, crucial, decisive state came down to a butterfly ballot and a bunch of hanging chads, and where the Supreme Court finally had to decide the thing in favor of the party that had appointed most of them. And the bumper sticker said, "Sore Loser Man." So here's my question. When are the Republicans going to get over the 2008 election instead of trying to ignore it or repeal it or do everything they possibly can to delegitimize the man who won it? You remember the 2008 election, don't you? That's the one where the winning side had almost 200 more electoral votes than the losing side. Not just 5, 192. Where the winning side had more popular votes, 8.5 million more votes than the losing side. Where the networks were able to call the winner within hours after the polls closed. All that stuff happened almost a year and a half ago. Barack Obama was elected President of the United States, and it wasn't even close. And the side that came up short that time, way short, is still refusing to accept that result, to accept reality. So tell me again, who are the sore losers? When are the Republicans going to get a life? When are the Republicans going to get over it? I see another bumper sticker. It says, hypocrites.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick. As long as he was
unbelievable.
As long as he was talking about Obama health care, where do we go from here? It's law now. It's not going to be repealed. What's going to happen?
Well, history tells us that it won't be repealed because I don't think there is an entitlement program that has been instituted by the federal government that has ever been scaled back or repealed or eliminated. So what you do is you go out and then you make history. It starts this November. And you throw out all these people who ignored the will of the people and ignored all those phone calls and ignored all the polls. And some news reports that I have seen have said that the Democrats could lose 50 seats in the House come November. And even Democrats are saying, Democratic insiders in Washington are saying that they are in trouble, that the Republicans are going to see some gains. So then you go out and you do that in November and you reform the reform and you start to make changes with the package that was signed into law. And then in 2012, you get a new president, and then you work from there because a lot of the so-called benefits of Obamacare will not trigger until 2014. So you have a chance. It's not a great one. It really isn't. But there is a chance, and that's how you do this thing. You do this incrementally, and you change the chairs and control, and you go back and try to fix what I think is dramatic, radical legislation that may be unconstitutional. The federal government cannot force any American to buy something that they don't want to buy.
Federal law doesn't count in this country anymore, is that it?
And that's what you do. You'll get your kick. Don't worry.
We're waiting.
First you reform, and then you repeal, as Paul Ryan said in the Wall Street Journal this week.
Let's make it clear. But they have. But let's make it really clear. When we talk about the fact that the people weren't hurt, that's just not true. The most recent USA Today Gallup poll shows that the plurality of the people who were polled are in favor of this health care. So now we can move off of that myth because that simply is not true. The most recent poll, though, I mean, we can all go back and take a look at 20 years ago or 5 years ago or 5 months ago.
I can take you last week.
But today, more people are in favor of it than people are who are against it. So that's the first thing.
That's the blip that comes after something like this.
The second point, though, is you're not just, what you're going to be talking about doing, if you talk about November or you talk about 2012, is you're going to be talking about taking away from people things that are now law. Are people going to be willing to go back and let the health insurance companies drop them whenever the health insurance companies
Denise,
feel
you're right.
like it, or whenever they get sick?
That is going to be what makes it difficult.
You did have a chance.
I think people are going to want to give things back.
People have a McDonald's memory in this country, and I think November comes, they aren't going to remember this.
Not only that, I mean, it's not about polls. It's about doing what's right. As the president said, basically, adding 32 million people who are now not covered, allowing people with pre-existing conditions, to get health insurance, allowing kids to stay on their parents' health insurance till
they're 26.
26.
Talk about freeloading.
Freeloading?
Get out and get in the real world, get a job, and contribute for yourself.
Believe me, when they're in their 20s, you're going to want to have them covered.
Not under this stuff.
But under this stuff, and that's the thing. The Republicans, and they showed it. Boy, did they show it this week with bricks through windows and yelling racial epithets and the ugliness. There is going to be such a backlash against. What Kevin's counting on is what everyone has always said about midterm elections, that the president's party always loses, and so there'll be some Republican gains. But I think the Republicans have handled this so badly. In fact, David Frum, a Republican speechwriter for George Bush, said so. He said this is their Waterloo because they did not get involved. All they did was vote no. And now you have a program that is going to benefit a lot of people.
Democrats are in big trouble.
Everybody's in big trouble who is an incumbent in this situation.
Well, especially those that voted yes after they said they were going to vote
We've
no.
got to wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be off for the next 2 weeks, so enjoy the rest of your weekend and have a great Easter holiday.
You say you haven't been the same since you had your little